The Florida Panthers are one win away from the first Stanley Cup victory in franchise history, but can the Edmonton Oilers rally? We've got that, plus our women's hockey spotlight and more coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to the Friday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Hockey GM. Ever dreamed of being an NHL GM and managing your hockey franchise? Well, now you can with Ultimate Hockey GM. It's completely free, and Locked On listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo Locked On NHL in the game store. To download the game, just visit hockeygm.app or look it up in the app stores. Ultimate Hockey GM, start your dynasty today. Rachel, happy Friday to you, and can you believe that the Florida Panthers are up 3-0 in this Stanley Cup Final series, even though every game has been pretty close?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is kind of the way I expected it to go, to be honest. I did have Edmonton winning one of their two home games in my head as far as the way the series would go. But I think that really what we're seeing is the Panthers panthering with their solid defensive structure. And that's what we talked about before the series began. And I think that it's the combination of that, and the Oilers are just making more mistakes.
Yeah, I think the mistakes have been key. Both of these teams are so well structured and so good at what they do, so much skill, that it becomes a game of mistakes and who can cash in on them. And it seems like Florida is just doing a better job of taking advantage of those mistakes than Edmonton. And I think depth is a part of it. I think, especially on the blue line, we've seen a couple of Edmonton defenders make more mistakes maybe than, other players on the ice, and Florida makes them pay.
Yeah, and I think if you look at last night's game in particular, the Sam Bennett goal for Florida was just like exhibit A of all of this that has been happening, because the Oilers had 3 chances to clear the puck, could not do it. There's a turnover, and Bennett takes advantage of that and scores the goal, which was kind of the dagger goal of this game.
Yeah, it really was. And yeah, I mean, all of the first 4 goals in the game, 3 of them by Florida, 1 by Edmonton, they were all off of mistakes. And I think that, again, the depth that Florida has, especially on the blue line, has been, in my mind, that and goaltending has been the biggest difference. And I don't think Stuart Skinner has played poorly. I don't think he's let in soft goals, but he hasn't come up with big saves to bail out some of his team's mistakes, where Bobrovsky seems to do a better job of making the save when it's important to make the save.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. You saw Bobrovsky make big save after big save in that game last night. And you look at the Broberg goal in the third period, which was just a dumb luck thing where the puck bounces off of your defenseman into the back of the net that had nothing to do with anything that Bobrovsky could have done. And so, and that sort of gets Edmonton going and back in the game. And, they do get one more, which was a legit goal. I think the tip that McLeod did was absolutely spectacular. It was a great play. Yep. But I think that, for the most part, the kinds of goals that Edmonton are getting are just kind of afterthought kind of goals.
And I think Edmonton isn't getting, they're getting more shots per game than Florida, but they're not getting second and third chances as often as Florida is. So, one shot and done is Sergei Bobrovsky is going to get most of those.
Right. And I think that is just indicative of how this Florida team has played the entire playoffs, that you may get through once, but you're not going to get through again, and we'll get a chance off of that rebound instead of you.
Yeah, I think that is definitely part of it. And I think, I guess if you look at the big scorers on both teams right now, Florida's big scorers are being more productive in this series than Edmonton's big scorers.
Yep. And I think that, when you don't get as many chances as the other team, you have to capitalize on them. And that's what is so great about the skill of this Florida team and how many of them that have those skills. I mean, Barkov had another fantastic game with a goal and an assist in this one, and just has proven, why he's such a valuable guy on this team. But then Sam Reinhart did. Tarasenko gets on the board. I talked about the Bennett goal, which was such a key play in that game. And you just keep running down the list and it doesn't end. And I think that, when you look at the Oilers side of things, you see Connor McDavid in desperation mode for huge swaths of the time. He's out on the ice and without as much of the support as he's gotten leading up to the final.
Yeah, I mean, he was on ice for 25 plus minutes in game 3 and, 2 assists, but did not put the puck in the net, had 5 shots on goal. But overall for the series, McDavid has not been a dominant force, at least as far as goal scoring is concerned.
No, I think that, nobody has, though, to be fair.
True.
And I think, that's partially due to the Florida defense and the Bobrovsky goaltending. But I think, these are the occasions where guys have to step up. And I think that, you look at Zach Hyman, you look at Leon Draisaitl in this game, nothing on the board for them. And so guys around McDavid have to pick up the slack too. If McDavid is getting, double teamed or getting swarmed and he's doing everything he can, the other guys have to step up, and they just have not been able to.
Yeah, no question. And shout out in my mind, sort of an unsung hero for Florida, Gustav Forsling, 28 minutes, 41 seconds of ice time, 4 hits, 2 block shots, an assist, a +1. But he was out there literally half the game and just quietly getting the job done.
Yeah, and this was a punishing game overall with, Edmonton had 43 hits, Florida had 38 hits. That is a very, very physical game. And Florida was able to withstand that and wound up, with only 4 giveaways after all of that to Edmonton's 10. I think that was a huge difference there.
Yeah, and I think part of that is the forecheck. Florida has a very good, aggressive forecheck. They force turnovers. They don't just happen to get them. And those giveaways do add up, and they take advantage of those opportunities. Got to give a shout out also, though, to the Edmonton fans. They were vocal from beginning to end, even though their team was down, 4-1 at one point, and it didn't look too good for them. So Edmonton fans who have not had a Stanley Cup Final game in their building since 2006 did a great job last night of just supporting their team and creating a great atmosphere.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been to games in that building, and it can get really loud in there. And it is a really exciting venue to be in when it's alive like that.
So game 4 Saturday night, is that the end of the season, do you think? Or do you think that Edmonton has at least one win in them to send the series back to Florida?
I think, for the fans' sake in Edmonton, I hope they get that one win and then the Florida fans can win a cup at home. I think that is the best case scenario. Plus, we as hockey fans get another game in the Stanley Cup Final and prolong the season for at least a couple more days. And I think that would be fun for all of us. But I know Florida would like to put this one away and go home happy.
Yeah, I think all of these games have been close. I just don't see Edmonton giving up that easily. I think they'll get the one win and then see what happens when it goes back to Florida. But it's been an entertaining series, even though it's 3-0. Just as a hockey fan and as a hockey, member of the hockey media, I have enjoyed watching these games just from a pure hockey standpoint.
Absolutely.
Well, we have got a lot more to get to on today's show. We'll have Erica Ayala join us for our women's hockey spotlight. And there's lots going on around the NHL outside the Stanley Cup Finals. We've got all that and more coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
Hey, Locked On NHL fans. I want to take a moment to bring up one of our partners, the mobile game Ultimate Hockey GM. Ever dreamed of becoming an NHL GM and managing your hockey team? Do you think you could run your favorite team better than their GM? Well, your dream can come true, and this game is for you. Manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through the seasons, and lead it to glory. You can hire the right coaches and staff, trade players or draft picks, navigate through free agency and the draft, all in a challenging and realistic game world. As an NHL fan, you know there is no off season. GMs are constantly making moves at every point of the year to improve their team's chances. That's why I think you're going to love this game. Plus, Ultimate Hockey GM is completely free and playable offline. You can play on the go as you want and when you want to. By the way, Locked On listeners get 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo Locked On NHL in the game store. So make sure you check it out. To download the game, just visit hockeygm.app. That's hockeygm.app, or look it up in the app stores. Ultimate Hockey GM, start your dynasty today.
It's time now for our bi-weekly women's hockey spotlight. That means we welcome back Erica Ayala. Erica, lots going on in the world of women's hockey. Let's start with a new coach for PWHL New York.
Indeed. We talked about it on one of our previous women's hockey spotlights. Would New York be able to place someone in their head coach role before the draft? And that is something that they were able to accomplish. They had the number 1 pick. We'll get into that in a minute, but they named their new head coach, Greg Fargo, just ahead of the draft. He's coming from Colgate University. He spent the last 12 seasons there as the head coach of the women's hockey program. If you know anything about women's hockey, you know that Colgate has been one of those teams, Rachel, right, that's been in the mix in the NCAA. Yeah. And we've seen players from Colgate go into the NWHL and /PHF prior to the PWHL existing. So, someone with women's hockey experience is definitely what we wanted. It's at the college level, and sometimes there can be a little bit of a learning curve there. But overall, I think someone that knows women's hockey is always a bonus, always a plus when you're looking to fill a role in a women's hockey league.
Absolutely. I think, that was exactly what we were looking for. Maybe not him in particular, wasn't really a name we brought up, but somebody who was deeply familiar with women's hockey was important for this team, who would care about this program in a special kind of way. And Greg Fargo seems like he's that guy.
Yeah, for sure. We'll see what Fargo does with the rest of the coaching staff, because there were some coaches under the PWHL New York that had pro women's hockey experience. We mentioned a few of them. So I'm very curious to see how they fill out their staff. But Gil, they also had the number 1 pick. And I feel like it's a pretty good thing to have a head coach in place even though usually it's the GM and the front office staff that's picking, but probably a good idea for you to have that coach in place sitting at the table, as we heard from, Pascal Daou, who is the GM. And with that first overall pick, I think it was pretty obvious who to take here, but they take Sarah Fillier, who has played in the NCAA at Princeton. And of course, Gil has been a mainstay with Hockey Canada on the women's senior team for quite some time.
Yeah, a solid first overall pick, no question about it. And look, PWHL New York needs to improve, and getting a coach in place and getting that number 1 pick in place, those are 2 steps along that road.
I know there is one program, Rachel, and you're kind of wearing their colors, it looks like, that absolutely, once we got the restart in sports, in women's hockey in particular, took off running. And I think that's reflected in how many players from The Ohio State University were drafted.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at the first round. I mean, we joke about Kayla Barnes, but she did attend Ohio State University, and Hannah Bilka picked before her to Boston, Kayla Barnes going to Montreal. It just shows the strength of that program. And there are so many top names in the women's game that have come out of that program.
I think also something worth noting is, and we talked about this a little bit, PWHL New York, they couldn't quite sign Claire Thompson. She was at NYU in medical school, and it was reported, though, that she entered the draft. She also has since said that she's taking a little bit of time away from her studies because effectively she felt, hey, I might not be able to play hockey forever, but theoretically, I can return to school and still fulfill that part of my dream and career path. So I thought that was interesting. And she goes third overall to the state of hockey, who hosted the draft. We have a lot of stuff to catch up with Minnesota, but how do you like this pick, defender Claire Thompson?
I really like this pick a lot. I think that, it's a little bit of a risk given, the re-entry process into the game for her, but her skill level is so high. And I feel like for a championship team to pick up a talent like her is a rare opportunity, and you have to take it.
Yeah, I agree. I think another thing that we see, Gil, before we get into awards, is that there was some question as to if the PWHL, would be able to attract any talent from Europe, not just who are already in the NCAA system at one of the programs playing in North America, or I guess even U Sports, but if they could attract professional athletes who are already playing professional women's hockey overseas to this league. And I think we did get a good mix. We have players from Russia, Sweden, Austria, a lot of them, Czechia. I love Team Czechia, so I love to see that alongside, of course, the United States and Canada. And this seems to be we've certainly seen that on the NHL side, right? A growing trend of players coming from all kinds of countries and being able to infuse a different style of play at the pro level.
Yeah, and I think it's important for the long-term health of the league to have that players coming from different countries and getting international interest in the game. And like you said, adding different styles, different approaches. I think in the long run, this is very good. And it also, I think in the long run, the more players you can bring in from Europe, the easier it will be to expand.
Yeah, for sure. And so we want to get into awards now. So we talked a little bit about the future. Now let's talk about who we saw as the pioneers who laid the foundation in the first season. So they mixed the draft, which was the first day, and then the second day they had everyone stick around for awards. And I was a little bit concerned, Rachel. I know we talked about it. We talked about how Spooner was having a fantastic season, how she has a fantastic story, and she did pretty well in the inaugural PWHL awards.
She did. She racked up 4 of the awards. Now, it was obvious that she was going to get the leading scorer and top goal scorer because the stats are there, right? You cannot argue with the numbers there. But as far as forward of the year and the overall MVP award, I think forward of the year was pretty obvious as well. But the overall league MVP award, maybe not so much, because there's a lot of options there, a lot of great players in this league. But I really think she deserved it. I think that when you look at her overall game and what she was able to accomplish, she deserved that Billie Jean King MVP award.
Yeah, I agree. So you mentioned it. She gets the MVP and forward of the year. Other awards we had now rookie of the year. So this is always interesting. I don't know that you really
get the first year of a league.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think, and this is the thing that I think is interesting in women's sports, because we see starts and stops much more than we see on the men's side, unless it's, arena football, I guess. But so there's a difference between being a rookie, a true rookie who has no pro experience, and then literally everyone being in their first season. So rookie of the year goes to PWHL Minnesota player Grace Zumwinkle. Led the Minnesota team in scoring 11 goals and 19 points in 24 games. Oh, by the way, en route to the first ever championship. Other finalists were Emma Malte and Alina Mueller. Coach of the Year award went to PWHL Toronto. Of course, and I think it's always worth saying, right, Gil? These are regular season awards.
Yes, voted on before the playoffs take place. And by the time they're awarded, everyone is always like, but wait. But no, it wasn't done that way.
Right, exactly. Troy Ryan stumbled kind of out the gate, it felt like, for PWHL Toronto. But to our point, and again, Gil just said it, this is a regular season award. And I do think Troy Ryan and his staff, they were able to just stick around and then get their team to perform in a really good way. Speaking of PWHL Toronto, they also get goaltender of the year, Kristen Campbell. Now, this is interesting because, again, Toronto struggled. And it seemed at times, Soupy, nickname, of course, obvious nickname, struggled as well. Goaltender of the year, I'm not mad at it, Rachel. And I think there are probably some other candidates that maybe would have been top of my list. Again, we can't necessarily say Aaron Frankel just because it might be recency bias if you're looking at the playoffs, right? But I do think Corrine Schroeder, and it's hard. It's hard, right, Gil, in any league for a player, especially a goaltender that's playing outstanding for a bad team, to win this kind of award. I think defender is always interesting. Do you look at someone who's producing offensively, or are you really looking at shutdown defense? I think this is a pretty solid choice in Erin Ambrose, 18 points in 24 games, including 14 assists. The other finalists were Megan Keller and Ella Shelton. I might have given it to Shelton. There were so many times where anything good that was happening for PWHL New York was because of Ella Shelton.
For me, that's probably the direction I would have gone in, except for the fact that, we talk about plus minus as a useless stat, but she was on the negative side of that.
Well, yeah.
And because of the team,
New York was on the negative side.
It's very much a team.
Right. Yeah. And then the counter argument is like, well, even considering all that, she actually put some points on the board as a defenseman. And I think that's kind of the argument for on a team that wasn't that good as a defenseman to put points on the board like that. I don't know. I can see the argument going both ways.
We got through the awards, and now we kind of got to talk about PWHL Minnesota. You win a title, you're hosting the draft and awards, and somehow none of that is the top story. They fired their general manager leading into the draft. That upset Minnesota fans. And then also, so Minnesota fans, Ken Klee is the head coach. He, I guess, is taking over now in a dual role, which we see a lot in women's sports. I don't love it, but hey, it is what it is. I think the way that I can summarize how fans felt about this is that there was a fan in the stands that had a sign that read, "Klee is not Kenuff," from the Barbie movie, which I thought was hilarious. There were boos. I mean, a la Gary Bettman walking into any hockey function. But then they also made a pick which got not just Minnesota fans upset, Rachel, but it got other, women's hockey fans upset. They picked Britta Curl out of Wisconsin with their second round pick. And that is troublesome for a lot of women's sports fans, especially women's hockey fans, because Britta Curl has engaged with conversations on social media that a lot of people deem homophobic and even racist. And as we see hockey trying to really clean some of that up, I think with the suspect, I would say, dismissal of Natalie Darwitz, who led the team to a title, and then getting Britta Curl. Also, Ken Klee did not go up on the stage when Britta was announced in a la, I don't know who thinks this is a great idea, but they had a black man and a woman up there instead of the general manager / head coach, even though he apparently was on the stage for everyone else. It left a bad taste in folks' mouth, Rachel.
It really did. And especially, sending up somebody who, a woman who is married to a woman, to make this pick. I just felt like that was so inappropriate on so many levels to try and justify this pick, because clearly they knew there was something wrong with it to make that decision. And if you know there's something wrong with it, don't make the pick. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and then Ken Klee spoke. He was asked if he spoke to anyone from the LGBT community. He said, I talk with players, with coaches. That's tough for me to answer. I spoke with a lot of different people. At the end of the day, I was told she's a great teammate. And, they were asked about Mira going up there, as you mentioned, famous hockey player, but also queer. And we have people in that community, and obviously Mira making that selection for us, I think that speaks volumes for us. So to your point, it was very intentional. And I think it does speak volumes, but not in the way Ken Klee thinks it does.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess we will see how this all pans out, but 1 year in the books and some new faces to the mix. Gil will have to come back in another week or so to talk about what is next for the PWHL.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to having you back and talking about that. It's always interesting. And Erica, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. So lots of news going on outside of the Stanley Cup Final. Some moves made around the league, and this is interesting. Let's start with the Carolina Hurricanes. They end up signing defenseman Jalen Chatfield to a 3-year deal worth $3 million per season. Your thoughts on this? He will now not hit the free agent market on July 1st.
Yeah, that part of it is the interesting part, right? Because you think like he could have gotten more money on the open market, but sometimes it's like the devil you know, right? In terms of your place on the team, how much ice time you're going to get. And they must have given him some sort of guarantee to that effect in order to get him to stay for slightly less money.
Yeah. And look, there's also, depending on the player, being familiar with your city, your family is there, perhaps. So there are always factors involved, but he will be staying in Raleigh for the next 3 years. The New York Rangers agreeing with potential restricted free agent winger Kaapo Kakko, a 1-year deal with a $2.4 million cap hit, according to the New York Post. And that was the amount of his qualifying offer. Your thoughts about Kakko?
Yeah, I think, he had, I would say, a better season than some might have expected this year. So there was a certain need to reward him as such, but he still needs to prove a little bit more. I think his overall expectations related to where he was at draft time have adjusted to some degree. And I think that doing the 1-year deal at this rate is a great way for him to be like, no, this wasn't a fluke this past year. I really am progressing. And it gives him the opportunity to earn a bigger payday while having the Rangers be in a low risk situation. So I can see why they did it. I can also see why some fans might have wanted a multi-year deal as well, though.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, Kakko is betting on himself, and it's sort of a win-win if he does come through this year. because obviously next year he'll be making even more money when it's time to renegotiate. But we'll see if this pays off for the Rangers and for Kakko. Meanwhile, some interesting moves in St. Louis. Doug Armstrong announcing that Alexander Steen will take over as GM in 2026. Your thoughts about this unusual move where, for the next 2 years, he'll be a special assistant under Armstrong and then take over as the GM?
Yeah, I think it is an interesting way to approach it and be sort of public about it ahead of time. We've seen things like this in sports over the years, across the board where you're like, oh yeah, so-and-so is the presumptive next GM. I mean, we saw it in Philadelphia with Danny Briere. We knew he was going to be GM eventually, but they didn't have an official succession plan like this. And so I just think it's fascinating to see it happen in a public way, and to basically guarantee him the role and have Doug Armstrong essentially move up the chain in 2 years.
Yeah, it will be interesting. And it does give you a certain amount of continuity in your franchise, which I think I like as a strategic move. Obviously, the people you put in place have to work out and work out well. And, the Blues have been a little bit up and down lately.
Yeah, and it also gives Steen a chance to really learn the ropes with less pressure. I think that is, there's something to be said for that he has to learn the ropes so he can hit the ground running when he officially takes over. And I think that will be important for him.
Absolutely. And you do it that way, you are theoretically giving your new GM every chance to succeed on the job training, so to speak. So, and you'll still have, the former GM there as an advisor. So I think it really is an interesting path forward, and we'll see how that works out for the St. Louis Blues. Meanwhile, the San Jose Sharks have hired Ryan Warsofsky as their 11th head coach. He is only 36 years old. He will now be the youngest active head coach in the NHL. He's been an assistant the last 2 seasons under David Quinn. Were you surprised by this move by the Sharks?
A little bit. I think there was a lot of momentum behind Marco Sturm. I think, with his history with the team and his success at the AHL level with Ontario, I think that, there was a lot of reason behind that momentum and that he was a really good option for the team. I think, there must have been something in the interview process that led them to believe that Warsofsky was the right way to go here, especially because he had been under David Quinn, who clearly just didn't work out for whatever reason they decided. I think sometimes, you tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and they did not do that here, which was, I think, really interesting. I think Warsofsky is a good option for the Sharks. I'm not discounting that. I just think it's a slightly different direction than maybe some would have expected.
Yeah, and a little strange to hire the assistant from the team that had the worst record, in the league. To have that continuity is a mixed bag when you're coming from where the Sharks are coming from, I guess. Your thoughts on Utah's jerseys for this year? We still don't obviously have a team name. They're going the PWHL route with, NHL Utah kind of.
I don't know. I think, people are saying it's boring. There's like nothing to it. I honestly don't care. It's a temporary jersey. And I think if it gives them more time to create a really strong brand, so be it.
Well, these will be collector's items. They're only going to be around for 1 season. So get them while they're hot, right? I mean,
yeah. Or cool, according to some people.
That's right. Absolutely. So we'll see how that plays out. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. That's going to do it for us today. I will be back with you on Monday interviewing 3 of our local hosts with the biggest stories from around the league. We're here every day, Monday through Friday, bringing you the biggest stories from around the NHL. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe, and thanks for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.